In this video, we are going to talk through a program that will calculate the average of some test scores. The goal of this program is to introduce you to the while loop using a sentinel value. It is also going to show you an accumulator variable, and an accumulating variable is a variable that will add different amounts to a variable throughout a program. It will also demonstrate a counting variable, and a counting variable counts by a set amount each time. Ours will add 1 because we are counting how many test scores are entered. And then we are also going to demonstrate the use of a method. So whenever we start our pseudocode, we have our declarations. And I am going to make some edits on the indentations here to demonstrate how you should indent your programs to show structure. So for example, on the declarations, you'll notice all the declarations are indented. And then I outdent after that in order to show that everything then is aligned along the left with this declarations. That is inside the start, which is on the far left. So whenever we start a pseudocode, we indent for our first line of code. Inside of the declarations, we indent, etc. I always like to have a message at the beginning of my program to tell the user what kind of program it is. This is being user-friendly. In this example, we also have the traditional display and then an input. So whenever you are inputting data, you should always have a user-friendly prompt, and then you will input the data. It's really a two-step process. We're going to show you a shortcut for that momentarily. Our while loop starts here, and as long as the user doesn't enter their sentinel value, in this case, that sentinel value is -1 to quit. We chose -1 because that is not going to be a typical score. Then, as long as our loop will continue as long as the score that they entered is not equal to -1. So this is one of our relational operators that we have just learned. So the exclamation point equals is not equals. Now, everything that's inside this while loop should be indented one level. So I just hit Tab. I am in Notepad++, so I've made my tabs automatically 2 spaces. So that was a little bit easier for me than it might be for you if you're using a different editor. So this shows the structure of everything that's in the while loop. There are basically 3 lines of code. The first line is our accumulator. So if I were to add a score of 40, then a score of 50, I'm going to take the value of a score and I'm going to add it to total. Total then is accumulating the values of all of the scores. The next variable here is a counter variable. That's a variable that increments by a set amount. This time we are adding 1 because we are counting how many scores we have because we're going to calculate an average. And then we have what we call the reprompt. Whenever we use a while loop, you have a prompt and an input before the loop. And then while you are or inside the loop, you'll have the reprompt. You have to do that, otherwise you would create an infinite loop. This reprompt is also the shortcut for your prompt and then input statement. So lines 18 and 19 can be combined into one statement where you take a score and then you are going to input. Instead of display here, this should be input because it's a input statement, and then we give it the prompt. So our prompt is inside quotes. It's inside an input method, and we're going to take that and assign it to a score. And then we end the loop. Outside of the loop, we're going to calculate the average, and we call a method, and we send it 2 parameters, total and number of scores. We'll look at the method in just a moment. Once the method is calculated and executed, the whole entire method returns a value stored to average. And then we display that answer. Whenever you display an answer, you should provide a label. So for example, we have your average score is, comma, average, or you might have your average score is plus average. Everything that's inside the quotes is a string that is going to be printed exactly as we see it inside the quotes. Outside the quotes is the variable average, which will display the value that is stored in that variable. And then we will end our program with a user-friendly message. Our method I have written below this code. And so our method returns a value. So I put the return type here. That is going to be num. Our method is named calculate average. Our method has two parameters. Those two parameters have to match in the order in which they were sent. So for example, I'm sending total from my main driver to my method, and then I'm sending number of scores to my method. Even though these variables are named exactly the same, you need to understand that they are different in terms of the memory locations. So total scores might be a different variable name that I could use to represent that. I happen to name them the same. You can name them slightly different if you would like. You need to understand that they are two separate variables and memory locations in the computer, even though the variable names are the same. We call that the scope of the variable. Inside my method, I need an additional variable in order to hold the scores average. I then will calculate the average using my parameter total and number of scores. So the total here is from my parameter. If I were to name it slightly different, just to show you, I could do tot for total, which I would tell you is not a descriptive variable. Then I could take tot divided by number of scores. And I could also make this number of scores. So then the variables would be different to illustrate that they are actually different locations in memory. So that's going to be up to you how you name those variables. And then I return the scores average. And so scores average, as you can see here, is what we call a local variable to calculate average. As soon as this method is done, those variables go out of scope. That is our demonstration of the pseudocode for this particular program.